قل هذه سبيلي أدعو إلى الله على بصيرة أنا ومن اتبعني وسبحان الله وما أنا من المشركين.
We will now start with the biography of the fourth Imam in this series of the exemplary, eminent scholars of Hadith that Imam Ibn Abi Hatim al-Razi rahimahullah has mentioned in his book Taqdimatul-Marifah bi Kitab al-Jarh wat-Tadeel. As we mentioned, we started with the city of Medina, the first center of Hadith and studies, and studied the biography of the Imam of Medina from the Atba' Tabi'een, Imam Malik ibn Anas rahimahullah. Then we moved to the second center of knowledge in those times in the area of Hijaz in Mecca, and we studied the biography of the Imam of that time, of those people, that region at the time of the Atba' Tabi'een, Sufyan ibn Uyayna. Then we moved to the area of Iraq, and we just covered the biography of the Imam of the area of Kufa, from the major centers of Hadith studies outside of Hijaz, from the great Imams of the Atba' Tabi'een, Sufyan al-Thawri rahimahullah. Now we move on to another major center of knowledge and center of Hadith studies in those times, of the city of Basra. The city of Basra in Iraq, and the Imam of the city of Basra and the scholars and the people of the city of Basra during the times of the Atba' Tabi'een, Imam Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj. Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj. And as always, we will start with his name and lineage. He is Abu Bistam. Abu Bistam. Abu Bistam. Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj ibn al-Ward. Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj ibn al-Ward. Al-Ataki al-Azdi. Al-Ataki al-Azdi mawlahum. Meaning, he is not from this tribe of Al-Ataki al-Azdi. Rather, he is his ascription to this tribe is by way of wala. By way of wala, meaning one of his grandfathers or people in his family, they accepted Islam at the hands of one of the people of these tribes. So they became ascribed to them. They became ascribed to them. Al-Ataki al-Azdi mawlahum al-Wasiti thumma al-Basri. Al-Wasiti thumma al-Basri. And as we'll mention, this means that he is originally from Wasit, from the city of Wasit in Iraq, where he was born. Then he moved to Basra. Then he moved and took up residence in the city of Basra, where he lived until his death, rahimahullah. He is al-Imam al-Hafiz, from the utmost precise memorizers of the hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Amirul Mu'mineen fil Hadith. He is also described to be as the Amirul Mu'mineen fil Hadith, Imam al-Jarh wat-Tadeel. He is from the foremost of the scholars of Hadith who spoke about the narrators of Hadith and praised them and criticized them in the area of Iraq, and defended the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam by way of that, as we'll discuss in detail inshallah. He is Imam al-Aimma bil Basra. He is the Imam of the Aimma of the region of Basra, from the major Atba' Tabi'een. He was born in the year 83 after the Hijrah. 83 after the Hijrah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as we mentioned, in the city of Wasit in Iraq. And then he moved to the city of Basra, where he took up residence until his death. Imam Khatib al-Baghdadi rahimahullah, he mentions that Shubah akbaru min Sufyan al-Thawri bi 10 sinin wa Thawri akbaru min Ibn Uyayna bi 10 sinin. This shows us, or allows us to understand the age gap and the relationship in time to these great imams that we have just covered. He says, Khatib al-Baghdadi, that Shubah was older than Sufyan al-Thawri by 10 years. He was older than Sufyan al-Thawri. They are all contemporaries. They are all from the imams of the Atba' Tabi'een. But even the Atba' Tabi'een, they have various levels. From them are the major scholars of Atba' Tabi'een, the Kibar. Then there are the Wusta, the middle level. And then the Sigar, the younger scholars from the Atba'u Tabi'een. So Imam Sufyan al-Thawri and Imam Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj, they're from the major scholars, from the Kibar Atba'u Tabi'een. As far as Imam Malik and Sufyan ibn Uyayna that we covered, they're from the Wusta, they're from the middle level of the Atba' at-Tabi'een. So this gives an idea of the age differences. Shubah, he is older than Sufyan al-Thawri by 10 years. By 10 years. And Sufyan al-Thawri is older than Sufyan ibn Uyayna by 10 years. Sufyan al-Thawri is older to Sufyan ibn Uyayna by 10 years. As far as him seeking knowledge, then just as our previous Imams, as was the way of these great Imams of the Salaf, they started to seek knowledge from a young age. They treaded the path of knowledge and seeking the knowledge of Hadith of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ from a young age. And from the great reasons for that is the correct, proper cultivation and motivation of the parents. And motivation of the parents. For really, Imam Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj's mother, just like the previous mothers that we have discussed of the great Imams, she was the one who directed him to this path of seeking knowledge. And this, in this, as we have mentioned before, is a point of reflection for all of our mothers and all of our wives of how to properly cultivate and raise their children with the love for Islam and the knowledge of Islam from a young age, and to direct them and to aid them in this path of seeking knowledge. And Imam Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj, he had two brothers. He had two brothers, and Imam Khatib al-Baghdadi has narrated the names Bashar and Hammad. Bashar and Hammad, and they were traders. They were traders who traded in correcting currency at that time. The currency, the various forms of currency they had, they used to correct it and check it in that time. So Imam Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj was supported in his travels, in his financial means, by way of these two brothers. By way of these two brothers. And this is a thing that is present in the lives of many of the scholars of Hadith. In our previous classes, someone asked a question regarding the statement of Imam Sufyan ibn Uyayna that we related that he lived on bread for a period of 60 years. And we mentioned that this was out of necessity. Many of the scholars of Hadith who lived in this state of poverty, and these statements that are related of them, this is because of necessity. They devoted all their time and effort in seeking the knowledge of Hadith and seeking the knowledge of Islam, and they did not have time to seek provisions in the worldly life to gain these benefits. Some of the scholars of Hadith, they had family members who would support them financially so they could dedicate themselves for seeking knowledge. And this is mentioned regarding well-known scholars of Hadith, that they had a brother or they had someone else who would support them financially to seek knowledge. And in this also is a great lesson for all of us, that every household from the households of the Muslims, then there should at least be one of the children who should be directed and dedicated to seeking the knowledge of Islam. To seeking the knowledge of Islam, and his other siblings, his other brothers, etc. They should aid him and support him in this path, following the example of these great Imams of the Salaf, following the example of these great Imams of the Salaf. Imam Shubah, rahimahullah, he says in one of the gatherings when he saw the students of Hadith come to him in a state of extreme poverty, and this poverty showed on their faces and in the clothes that they were wearing, he said, وَيْلَكُمْ إِلْزَمُوا السُّوقَ فَإِنَّمَا أَنَا عِيَالٌ عَلَىٰ أَخَوَيَّ. That, woe to you, work and seek sustenance and provision in this worldly life so you can better yourself and better your situation, your financial situation. Don't look at me. Don't take me as an example, because I have two brothers who are financially supporting me. So of course in this worldly life, everyone has to find a means to support himself, to eat, to drink, and to live off the provisions of this life. Either he has to work, or one follows the way of these great Imams of the Salaf. One of his family members, he dedicates himself to supporting him so that that person can be free to seek knowledge, and he will gain the reward of that person seeking knowledge and every piece of knowledge and information that he conveys and learns and teaches the people. Imam Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj rahimahullah will mention some great statements that show his dedication and zeal and strive and efforts and sacrifice in this path of seeking knowledge. That these great Imams reached these high levels not with ease. They dedicated themselves and their lives in this path. He says, اختلفت إلى عمرو بن دينار 500 مرة وما سمعت منه إلا 100 حديث في كل 5 مجالس حديثا. He says that I traveled to Amr ibn Dinar, 500 times. From the great Imams of the Atba'u Tabi'in, Amr ibn Dinar, I traveled to him how many times? Once, twice, 10 times, 50, 100, 500 times. And I did not hear from him except 100 ahadith. Except 100 ahadith. In every 5 gatherings that I traveled to him, he would narrate to us 1 hadith. He would narrate to us 1 hadith. So this shows his extreme zeal and striveness in this knowledge, that he traveled to this one scholar 500 times, and he was patient upon this path. Even though he would only hear 1 hadith every 5 gatherings, he continues upon this path until he could collect 100 hadith, or after 500 gatherings. If one of us goes to a scholar once, twice, I think that will be the end of our journeys to such a scholar, and we will never look at him or learn from him again. But this was the patience of the scholars of the Salaf. This is the reason they reached these great levels in this religion, because of this diligence and patience. He says, Imam Shubah rahimahullah, ما سمعت من رجل عدد حديث إلا اختلفت إليه أكثر من عدد ما سمعت منه الحديث. He says that I did not study and learn and hear hadith from any of my teachers, any of my shuyukh, except that I traveled to him more times than the ahadith that I heard from him. Except that I traveled to him more times than the ahadith that I heard from him. And this is in times where there's no modes of transportation and there's no ease and comfort that we, alhamdulillah, are blessed with today. And they were patient upon this path, and they would take these long journeys, and the travels that they did to the scholars were more than the ahadith that they heard from these scholars. So this shows us how a student of knowledge should be patient, and he should have extreme zeal and diligence and exert himself in this path of seeking knowledge. Imam Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj also says, أكثرت عن هؤلاء ابن عوف والأسود ابن شيبان وسليمان ابن المغيرة ولو قدرت أن آخذ كل يوم لابن عوف بالركاب لفعلت. He says that I have narrated a large number of hadith. I heard a large number of hadith from these shuyukh, from these teachers, Ibn Auf and Aswad ibn Shayban and Sulaiman ibn Mughira. And if it was possible for me to travel to my teacher Ibn Auf every day, if it was possible for me to get on a riding horse or on a camel or a mode of transportation to travel to him every day, I would have done so. If it was possible for me, I would have done so. So this was the zeal they had and diligence to have patience on this path of seeking knowledge. Imam Abu Dawud al-Tayalisi, from the great Imams of Hadith, who has a well-known book, Musnad, al-Musnad al-Tayalisi, which is the first Musnad that was authored in the science of al-Masanid, the first book that was authored on the methodology of the Masanid, where the ahadith of every single Sahabi is gathered in one place. Ahadith of Abu Bakr are gathered in one place, ahadith of Umar, ahadith of Uthman, ahadith of Ali, ahadith of Abu Huraira, etc. They all gathered in one place. So the first book that was authored in this field is the book of Musnad of Imam Abu Dawud al-Tayalisi, who passed away in the year 204 after the Hijrah, and that book is alhamdulillah published and with us today. He says, قال لي حماد بن زيد إذا خالفني شعبة في حديث سرت إلى قوله. Hammad ibn Zayd, as we mentioned, from the great Imams of Basra, from the same region that Imam Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj resided in, he said that if Shubah were to oppose me in the narration of a hadith, in his chain of narration, or in his wording, then I would leave my narration and I would accept his narration. I would accept his narration. And as we mentioned, in the biography of Imam Hammad ibn Zayd, he is from the utmost of the precise memorizers and Imams in the science of hadith. So, Imam Abu Dawud al-Tayalisi, he asked Imam Hammad ibn Zayd, قلت كيف يا أبا إسماعيل؟ قال إن شعبة كان لا يرضى أن يسمع الحديث 20 مرة وأنا أرضى أن أسمعه مرة. He says, why would you, from the great Imams of this science, why would you leave your narration for the narration of Imam Shubah? He said, verily, Imam Shubah would not suffice, would not rest, would not be assured of that hadith until he heard it 20 times. Until he heard that single hadith 20 times. He would travel to that Sheikh who was narrating the hadith 20 times to hear the same hadith, so that he would preserve it precisely, accurately, and he would be assured of his precision. And Ahmad ibn Zayd, he said, as for me, then I would hear it only once. As for me, I would hear it only once. So that is why I would leave my narration for Imam Shubah's narration. This shows the great patience and diligence these Imams had. If we find today a scholar narrating a hadith or teaching a science or teaching a book that we might have brokenly studied or heard before, we will never attend his gathering. We will say that that is enough. We have studied this science, we have studied this book, we have heard this, and that is enough for us. But this is the way of these great scholars of the Salaf, and the reason they reach these levels in knowledge. Imam Shubah, he says, rahimahullah, inni la udhakiru bil hadithi yafutuni fa amrad. That rarely in the gatherings of the students of hadith, where there is revision and review of the hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if I were to hear a hadith that I did not have in my memory and possession, I would become sick. I would become sick, showing the great diligence they had and how they are the reasons that the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is preserved with us today, and how it reached us preserved today. That a single hadith, if he did not know, he would become sick, that he did not travel for it, he did not hear it, and did not preserve it and memorize it. Imam Shubah, he says, كنت آتي قتادة فأسأله عن حديثين ثم يقول لي أزيدك فأقول لا حتى أتحفظها وأتقنها. That I used to come to my teacher, my great teacher Qatada, from the great Imams of the Tabi'een, Qatada ibn Di'ama as-Sudusi. Qatada ibn Di'ama as-Sudusi. He said that I would come to him and I would ask him to narrate how much? 2 ahadith to me. To teach me 2 ahadith. So Qatada, upon narrating 2 ahadith within a few seconds or minutes, he would ask him, because he traveled and struggled to come to him, this journey, he would ask him, should I narrate to you more ahadith? Would you like to hear more ahadith? Imam Shubah would say, no, until I return and memorize it and safeguard it and preserve it, and I'm assured of his precision, then I would come back to you to hear more ahadith. So such was their methodology in seeking knowledge. The knowledge is done with stages over time. The person who wants to seek this knowledge in one gathering, in one sitting, in short courses, in crash courses, then he will never gain this knowledge. Knowledge is done in over a long period of time, in short steps, in short stages. This great Imam, with the great blessing that Allah Ta'ala had blessed him with in his memory and his capability to memorize, he would only hear 2 ahadith and make sure that he heard it and preserved it precisely until he heard the next 2 ahadith. And this is also a reason how these ahadith, as we mentioned, reached us today, and we are assured and certain that these are exactly the ahadith that the Prophet ﷺ said, and the actions that he did without any addition and subtraction and alteration. Imam Abu Dawud al-Tayalisi also says, كنت يوما بباب شعبة وكان المسجد ملأ فخرج شعبة فاتكأ علي وقال يا سليمان ترى هؤلاء كلهم يخرجون محدثين؟ قلت لا. قال صدقت ولا 5. Imam Abu Dawud al-Tayalisi, he said that I was one day at the door of my teacher, Imam Shubah, and the masjid where his gathering was being held in Basra, it was full with students of knowledge, with students of hadith. So he came out from his residence and he took or he placed his hand on me, or he took me and he said, Ya Sulaiman. The name of Imam Abu Dawood is Sulaiman. Imam Abu Dawood is al-Tayalisi. He said, Oh Sulaiman, do you believe or do you think that all the students who are gathered in this masjid that is filled with students of hadith and students of knowledge, do you think all of them will turn out to be muhaddithin? Do you think all of them will turn out to be from the scholars of hadith? So I said, Imam Abu Dawood, he says, no. So Imam Shubah says, Sadaqta, verily you have spoken the truth. Wala khamsa, not even 5 will turn out to be muhaddithin, from the scholars of hadith. يكتب أحدهم في الصغر ثم إذا كبر تركه أو يشتغل بالفساد. He says, not even 5 of them will become scholars and will become muhaddithin, the scholars of hadith. Why? Because these people, they have zeal today, they are gathered, but when they get older, they leave off this knowledge. They are not persistent. They don't have the patience to continue in this path. So today they have the zeal. They are coming to these gatherings and they are attending, but they do not revise, they do not review, they do not continue on this path. So they will not benefit from this. Or, waliyadu billah, some of them will turn towards matters of the worldly affairs or matters of sinning and other than them. So this is a way for the scholars to show that it is not enough that a person attends the gatherings of knowledge and then he goes away, leaves off that knowledge until the next gathering. Rather, it is upon him to go back and revise and review and to safeguard and to memorize that knowledge. Otherwise, he will just find after several years he has spent and his lifetime that he has not benefited anything, that he has not gained any knowledge. So Abu Dawood, he said after hearing this statement, ثُمَّ نَظَرْتُ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ فَمَا خَرَجَ مِنْهُمْ خَمْسًا, that I saw after several years and decades that the statement of Shubah came true. I realized who was in that gathering and I did not find even 5 of them who became scholars of hadith. Who became scholars of hadith because they had no patience and they left off this path of knowledge. As far as his teachers and shuyukh, whom he studied hadith from and who learned the sciences of Islam from in Basra and his great travels all over the Muslim nation, then from the people he saw from the great tabi'een are Al-Hasan al-Basri and Muhammad ibn Sirin, the great 2 students of several of the companions of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he saw them at a young age. He did not hear a hadith from them. He was at such an age that he could not hear a hadith from them, but he still had this virtue of seeing them, Al-Hasan al-Basri and Muhammad ibn Sirin. As far as hearing hadith and learning it from his teachers, then he heard hadith and learnt it from more than 300 shuyukh and teachers from the tabi'een. More than 300 of his teachers were from the major scholars of the tabi'een. From them is Sa'id al-Maqburi and Qatada ibn Di'ama as-Sadusi, as we just mentioned, and Amr ibn Dinar, as we just mentioned, and Yahya ibn Abi Kathir, and Ayyub as-Sakhtiyani, these great scholars of the tabi'een, and other than them. As far as his students, then countless students traveled to him to hear hadith and to learn the science of hadith from him, and he relayed a hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to them, then who carried this legacy onwards. From the major of them are some of his teachers, as we mentioned from the previous imams, Imam Ayyub as-Sakhtiyani and Sa'id al-Jurayri and Mansur al-Mu'tamir and Matar al-Warraq and Mansur ibn Zazan and other than them. They are all from the teachers and shuyukh of Imam Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj, who due to his virtue and the high level he reached in the science, they heard a hadith that they did not have in their possession from him and narrated upon the authority of this student of this, Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj. And from his well-known students, from his contemporaries, are Sufyan al-Thawri, Imam Sufyan al-Thawri that we just mentioned, and Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak, and Abu Ishaq al-Fazari, and Hammad ibn Zayd, and Hammad ibn Salama, and Sufyan ibn Uyayna, and Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Qattan, and Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi. These great Imams of the Salaf and scholars of Hadith, they are all from the students of this great Imam Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj. Salam ibn Qutayba rahimahullah, he says that Ataytu Sufyan al-Thawri fi Kufa, that I traveled to Kufa and I met the Imam of Kufa of that time, Sufyan al-Thawri. So he asked me, فَقَالَ مَا فَعَلَ أُسْتَاذُنَا شُعْبَةً, what has our ustaz and teacher, out of respect for his knowledge and his position, even though he's contemporary to him, he said, what has our ustaz Shubah done, and what has he said? And you benefit from me with what you have seen him say and what you have learned from him. And from the proofs of his great status in the science of hadith and in Islam is that Imam Malik, whose biography we covered in our previous lecture, the Imam of Ahlul Madinah, he narrates on Imam Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj by way of a narrator between him and Imam Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj. He narrates upon hadith upon Shubah by way of a narrator that is between them, not directly. And this, as a reason that we mentioned, is that Imam Malik did not travel for the pursuit of hadith. He was in the city of Medina where the scholars traveled to. So he did not travel for the pursuit of hadith. That did not allow him to collect the hadith of Iraq, as we mentioned in that biography, that Imam Sufyan ibn Uyayna is greater in quantity than Imam Malik in the number of hadith, because he gathered the hadith of Hijaz along with the hadith of Iraq. And Imam Malik only had his possession, the hadith in his possession, the hadith of al-Hijaz. So Imam Malik, out of the status that Imam Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj reached, and not to be deprived of this virtue of being in a chain of narration along with this Imam, he narrated upon a narrator on the authority of Imam Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj, even though he was his contemporary. They are both from the Atba at-Tabi'een. So this shows that Imam Malik, the high regard he held this great Imam Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj in. And this is something extremely rare that Imam Malik does, that he narrates on a contemporary by way of another narrator and not directly upon him, as Imam al-Zahabi rahimahullah has mentioned. Then we move on to the praise of the scholars of the great scholars of Islam and the great scholars of hadith for the status of Imam Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj in the sciences of Islam, and especially the science of hadith. Imam Sufyan al-Thawri, as we just mentioned, his contemporary, he says, Shu'batu Amirul Mu'minin fil hadith. Verily Shubah is the leader of the believers in this science of hadith. And as we will see, that Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj rahimahullah, he passed away a year before Sufyan al-Thawri rahimahullah. He passed away in the year 160. So their contemporaries, one was the Imam of Kufa and the other the Imam of Basra, two major centers of knowledge and of hadith sciences in Iraq of the times. Imam al-Shafi'i, he says rahimahullah, لَوْلَا شُعْبَةً لَمَا عُرِفَ الْحَدِيثُ بِالْعِرَاقِ, that if it wasn't for Shubah, then hadith, it would not be known and preserved correctly in the region of Iraq. Iraq has always been a land, as the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned in authentic hadith, a land of trials and tribulations, where most of the misguided sects and the deviant groups arise. And it has always been a land of conflict and trials. So ahadith in Iraq were fabricated, were lies upon Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, were strange ahadith, gharaib and manakir, those ahadith that are to be rejected. So Imam Shafi'i says, if Allah Ta'ala had not blessed the people of Iraq with Imam Shubah, hadith would not be properly preserved in the region of Iraq. It would all become mixed up with the fabricated narrations and the wrong, incorrect and made up narrations. Imam Shubah was utilized by Allah Azza wa Jal to differentiate the authentic from the unauthentic. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, from the great Imams, the Imam of Ahl-Sunnah wal-Jama'ah, he says, كان شعبة أمة وحده في الحديث. Verily, Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj, he was an entire nation by himself in the science of hadith. He himself undertook the responsibility of an entire nation to preserve and safeguard the hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He did what an entire nation could and should have done. What an entire nation of people could have done and should have done, he did it by himself. Allah Ta'ala had blessed him with this ability and utilized him in this great affair. Hammad ibn Zayd rahimahullah, he says, قال لنا أيوب السختياني, from the teachers of Imam Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj, from the Imams of the Tabi'een, he says, الآن يقدم عليكم رجل من أهل واسط يقال له شعبة وهو فارس الحديث فإذا قدم فخذوا عنه. Imam Ayyub al-Sakhtiyani rahimahullah, from the great Imams of the Tabi'een, he said when Shubah was coming to Basra to reside in it, he said that verily a person now will travel to you and come to you from the area of Wasit in Iraq. As we mentioned, Imam Shubah was born and resided in Wasit before moving to Basra. And his name is Shubah, who are Farisul Hadith. He is from the foremost of the leaders and people who have knowledge in Hadith and its sciences. فَإِذَا قَدِمَ فَخُذُوا عَنْهُ. If he were to come, when he arrives, learn from him and take knowledge from him. He is advising his students to take knowledge from this great Imam Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj, who this great Imam of the Tabi'een, Ayyub al-Sakhtiyani rahimahullah. Muhammad ibn Abdullah al-Raqashi, he says, and Hammad ibn Zayd, أنه كان إذا حدث عن شعبة قال حدثنا الضخم ابن عن الضخام شعبة الخير أبو بسطام. حدثنا الضخم عن الضخام شعبة الخير أبو بسطام. That Hammad ibn Zayd rahimahullah, if he were to narrate a hadith on the authority of Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj rahimahullah, he would say this line of poetry and praise, that the strong one, the powerful one in this science, who has reached the pinnacle of this science, he has narrated to me upon his authentic and reliable teachers from the Tabi'een. Ad-Dakham and Ad-Dikham. Who is that? Shu'batul Khair Abu Bistam. The Shubah, Imam Shubah, who is a part of goodness. And then he mentioned his kunya, Abu Bistam. Imam Abu Zayd al-Ansari rahimahullah, he says, هل العلماء إلا شعبة من شعبة. هل العلماء إلا شعبة من شعبة. That are the scholars of Islam, those who were in the time of Shubah and those who came after him, are they not? They are just apart from Shubah. His name literally, Shubah, means apart. So they are apart from Shubah. The knowledge that they possess is apart compared to the knowledge that Imam Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj he possessed. Salih ibn Muhammad al-Baghdadi, he says, أول من تكلم في الرجال شعبة بن الحجاج ثم تبعه يحيى بن سعيد القطان ثم تبعه أحمد بن حنبل ويحيى بن معين. That the first person who spoke in the matters of the narrators of hadith, praising them and disparaging them, criticizing them, was Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj. This is not to be taken in its literal meaning. There are scholars who preceded Imam Shubah who spoke upon the narrators of hadith, and criticized them. But he was the first scholar who took this as a necessary methodology to accept and reject a hadith. And his speech on the narrators of hadith is more than any speech of any scholar that preceded him. He extensively spoke upon the narrators of hadith, studying their affairs and ruling upon their reliability in order to differentiate authentic hadith from unauthentic hadith. Then the one who followed him in this methodology was his great student, whose biography we will study, Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Qattan. Then the one who followed Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Qattan in this methodology, the two great Imams also whose biography we will study, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal and Yahya ibn Ma'in. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Yahya ibn Ma'in.
Who said this?
This is said by Salih ibn Muhammad al-Baghdadi. Salih ibn Muhammad al-Baghdadi. Imam al-Nasai, the author of the well-known book from the 6 books of Hadith, Sunan al-Nasai, he says, Umana'ullahi ala ilmi Rasulillahi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam thalathatun, Shu'batu wa Malikun wa Yahya al-Qattan. That the safeguarders of the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the ones who have preserved the Ahadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, they are 3 people, Shubah and Imam Malik and Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Qattan. Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Qattan, showing the great reverence these scholars had for this great Imam Shubah and the high level he reached in the science and the efforts he exerted in the preservation of the Hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Then we'll move on to the next topic, which is mentioning some of the life events of this great Imam that we can reflect upon and ponder and take benefits from, some of the incidents and occurrences that occurred during his lifetime and to him. Abu Qatan Amr ibn al-Haytham, he says, كان شعبة كثير الصلاة كثير الصيام. That Imam Shubah, in addition to the great level he reached in this knowledge of Hadith, he put that knowledge into action. He applied that knowledge. He was always in prayer and always in a state of fasting. He fasted a lot and he prayed a lot. So this knowledge, it was not done just for the sake of seeking this knowledge, rather to put it into practice and put it into action. Abu Qatan also says, ما رأيت شعبة ركع قط إلا ظننت أنه قد نسي ولا قعد بين السجدتين إلا ظننت أنه قد نسي. That really I did not see my teacher and Sheikh Shubah make ruku' in salah, except that I thought that he had forgotten to rise up from ruku', from his prolonging of the ruku'. And I did not see him sitting between the two sajdas, except that I thought that he forgot to make the second sajda due to his prolonging of the sitting between the two sajdas. Abu Zayd al-Harawi, he says, رَأَيْتُ شُعْبَ يُصَلِّي حَتَّى تَرِمَ قَدَمَاهُ. That I saw Shubah, rahimahullah, praying to the point that his feet swelled up and his feet became tired and they swelled up. And Imam Shubah, rahimahullah, in these acts of his, he has taken the Prophet ﷺ as his example and role model. The Prophet ﷺ, as has come in authentic hadith, that the Sahaba would say he would make ruku to the point that we would think that he forgot to rise up. He would make sajda to the point that we would say he forgot to rise up. He would sit between the sajdatain to a point we would say that he forgot to. Such was the tranquility he had in his salah, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And also this is authentically narrated. Umm-ul-Mu'minin Aisha radiallahu anha, the mother of the believers, informs us that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would pray to the point that his feet would swell up. So Imam Shubah and these great Imams of the Salaf, they had taken the Prophet ﷺ as their role model and guidance. And every hadith that they heard about regarding him and his actions and his life, they implemented it. Abdul Aziz ibn Dawood, he says, كان شعبة إذا حك جلده انتثر منه التراب. That Imam Shubah, rahimahullah, if he were to scratch his skin, then sand and dirt would fall out from his skin. Showing the great exertion these Imams had in this path of seeking knowledge. They sought knowledge in the most difficult of circumstances, sitting on pieces of land and dirt without any carpets, without any tiles and the blessings we have today. They traveled faraway lands in dirt, storms and other events that caused them to reach such a level in gathering the hadith of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, to a point if he were to scratch his skin, then dirt and sand would fall out from his skin. Another Ibn Shumail, he says, ما رأيت أرحم بمسكين من شعبة كان إذا رأى المسكين لا يزال ينظر إليه حتى يعطى. That Imam Shubah, I did not see anyone more generous and merciful to a poor person, a miskin, than him. If he were to see a poor person in his gathering of hadith, he would continue to look at him and wait until someone would give him and suffice him what he needed. Someone would give him and suffice him what we needed. Now we have a great story that shows, there are many narrations that show that Imam Shubah, he would establish his gatherings of knowledge so that the poor students of hadith would come to him, and so that they would be given that which would suffice them. And he would not narrate until they were given. And if they were not given, he would get up and leave. He would get up and leave. One such stories are this great story that Imam Abu Dawud al-Tayalisi, rahimahullah, from the great students of Imam Shubah, as we mentioned, he says, كنا عند شعبة نكتب ما يملي فسأله سائل فقال شعبة تصدقوا فلم يتصدق أحد. That we were in the gathering of Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj, and he was narrating to us the hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So one of the poor students of knowledge from the poor students of hadith, he asked him for that which would suffice him. So Shubah, he said to the other students, give him charity, give him that which would suffice him. فَلَمْ يَتَصَدَّقْ أَحَدٍ. So no one gave him anything. No one gave him anything. فَقَالَ تَصَدَّقُوا فَإِنَّ أَبَا إِسْحَاقَ حَدَّثَنِي عَنْ عَبْدِ اللَّهِ بْنِ مَعْقِلٍ. So he started narrating a hadith on Prophet Muhammad ﷺ saying, قَالَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمْ اتَّقُوا النَّارَ وَلَوْ بِالشِّقِّ تَمْرَةٍ. That the Prophet ﷺ, he said that shield yourself and protect yourself from the hellfire even by way of giving a part of a date in charity. But a part of a date, even if it is measly in your eyes, but it is great in the eyes of Allah Azza wa Jal. Even if it's part of a date, shield yourself and protect yourself from the hellfire. So he narrated this hadith, فَلَمْ يَتَصَدَّقْ أَحَدٍ. Even after hearing this hadith, none of the students, they gave charity to this person. فَقَالَ تَصَدَّقُوا فَإِنَّ عَمْرِ بْنُ مُرَّةَ حَدَّثَنِي عَنْ خَيْثَمَةٍ. Then he started narrating another hadith, to the point that he says, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم اتقوا النار ولو بشق تمرة فإن لم تجدوا فبكلمة طيبة. He narrated this hadith with another chain that had extra words that shield yourself and protect yourself from the hellfire even by way of a part of a date. And if you were not to find even that, then say something good, say something pleasant to the person who's asking. Do not scold him. Do not rebuke him. Say something that is pleasant. فَلَمْ يَتَصَدَّقْ أَحَدٍ. Even after this, no one gave anything in charity. فَقَالَ تَصَدَّقُوا فَإِنَّ مُحَلَّنَ الضَّبِّي حَدَّثَنِي عَنْ عَدِي بْنُ حَاتِمٍ. Then he narrated a third hadith. And he said, قَالَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ وَاسْتَتِرُوا مِنَ النَّارِ وَلَوْ بِالشِّقِّ تَمْرَةٍ فَإِن لَمْ تَجِدُوا فَبِكَلِمَةٍ طَيِّبَةٍ. Then he narrated this hadith with another chain and another meaning, that protect yourself and create a shield between yourself and the hellfire by way of even a part of a date. And if you were not to find it, say something pleasant to the questioner. فَلَمْ يَتَصَدَّقْ أَحَدٍ. Even after this, even after narrating 3 hadith, no one in the gathering gave any charity. فَقَالَ قُومُوا عَنِّي فَوَاللَّهِ لَا حَدَّثْتُكُمْ ثَلَاثَةَ أَشْهُرٍ. After that he said, rise up, rise up and leave me. I will not narrate a hadith to you for 3 months. I will not narrate hadith to you for 3 months. 3 times he asked them to give to the poor person. And he narrated a hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and no one took those hadith enacted upon them. They all took that for granted. So he said, leave me, I will not narrate to you for 3 months. ثُمَّ دَخَلَ مَنْزِلَهُ فَأَخْرَجَ عَجِينًا فَأَعْطَاهُ السَّائِلُ فَقَالَ خُذْ هَذَا فَإِنَّهُ طَعَامُنَا الْيَوْمِ. Then he entered his own house, and he came out with a loaf of bread, and he gave it to that poor student of knowledge, to student of hadith, and he said, take this, for verily it is our food for today. This is the only food we possess, it is our food for today, but take this, this is for you. Muslim Ibn Ibrahim, he says, كان شعبة إذا وقف في مجلسه سائل لا يحدث حتى يعطى فقام يوما سائل ثم جلس فقال ما شأنه قال ضمن عبد الرحمن بن مهدي أن يعطيه درهما. That this act and this methodology of Imam Shubah, it resonated also with his great students, and they followed him in this path. It is mentioned that in one of the gatherings of Imam Shubah, one of the poor students of knowledge started to ask for his charity or for what he can survive off. So he stopped narrating ahadith until he would be given what would suffice him. Then he saw a person ask and then sit down. He saw that the person that was asking, he sat down. So he asked the students, why did he ask and why did he sit down? So it was told that your great student who was present in the gathering, Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi, Al-Imam Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi, whose biography also we'll study inshallah in our future lectures, he gave him a dirham. He gave him a dirham, a dollar or a dirham that sufficed him, so he sat down. So then he continued to narrate hadith. Continued to narrate hadith. Then we move on to the next topic, which is the aqidah and the creed and the belief of this great imam from the imams of the Salaf, from the great imams of the Ahle-Hadith, Imam Shubah, Ibn al-Hajjaj, rahimahullah. And as we mentioned, and we keep mentioning, that he is not different to the previous imams and the other imams of the Salaf in this regard. All of them are united in their methodology, in these matters of creed and belief. Waqi' ibn al-Jarrah, he says, إني لأرجو أن يرفع الله لشعبة درجات في الجنة بذبه عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Verily, I pray and hope and wish that Allah Azza wa Jal will raise Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj in ranks on the in paradise due to him defending the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They gave precedence to the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, followed it, believed in it, and opposed all the misguidance and deviations and the deviant sects and groups that arose in their times. In the books of Jarh wat-Tadeel, the books that have collected the rulings of these great imams of hadith, the foremost imams of Jarh wat-Tadeel, from them Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj, in which you will find rulings upon the narrators of hadith, you will find abundant statements and narrations from Shubah such as this, that he would say on a narrator, لا تكتب عن محمد بن راشد فإنه معتزل رافضي فإنه معتزلي رافضي. That do not write upon this narrator Muhammad ibn Rashid, for verily he is a Mu'tazili and he is a Rafidi. He is a Mu'tazili and a Rafidi. He is not from Ahlul Hadith, Ahlul Sunnah. He is from one of the misguided deviant sects, the Mu'tazila and the Rafida Shia. And you will find this is just one example. Otherwise, we can compile a book on this, the statements of Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj rahimahullah, refuting the people of innovation and exposing them and rejecting their ahadith. You will find this abundant in the books of Jarh wat-Tadeel. Then we move on to the next topic, which is his ittiba, his methodology in jurisprudence and following the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam unconditionally in his matters of worship, in his matters of ahkam, in the rulings of Islam. Imam Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj rahimahullah, he says, كل حديث ليس فيه حدثنا وأخبرنا فهو خل وبقل. That every hadith that does not have in it, with it, حدثنا and أخبرنا, the chain of narration that is by which we can determine if this hadith is authentic or not, then it is something that is of no value. Those statements, those positions, those claims that are not with the chain of narration that can allow us to determine if this hadith is authentic on the authority of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then it is like khal and bakal, meaning it is of something that is extremely measly, that is of no value, that is of no value. Then we move on to the great statements of this Imam Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj rahimahullah. From his statements is a statement that many of the scholars of hadith, and we have mentioned this in some of the previous scholars such as Sufyan ibn Uyayna, they say that man talab al-haditha aflas, that the student of hadith, the one who embarks upon this path of studying hadith and the sciences of hadith, then he is sure to face poverty. He is sure to face poverty, because one person cannot combine exertion in the worldly affairs with this path of seeking knowledge. He has to sacrifice one of them. And the study of hadith, the science of hadith, necessitates for a student of knowledge to travel for the pursuit of hadith. And these travels take money and cost money and expenses. So a person who is a student of hadith, then he can never be rich. Imam Shubah rahimahullah, he says, إِذَا كَانَ عِنْدِي دَقِيقٌ وَقَصَبٌ فَمَا أُبَالِي مَا فَاتَنِي مِنَ الدُّنْيَا. He says that if I had flour and qasab, meaning firewood to cook that flour, then that is enough for me from this worldly affairs. Then I do not care about what has left me from the pleasures of this worldly life. If I have that which I can suffice with, then this is enough for me. Qurrat Abu Nuh, he says, رأى علي شعبة قميصا فقال بكم اشتريت هذا فقلت ب8 دراهم قال ويحك أما تتق الله تلبس قميصا ب8 دراهم ألا اشتريت قميصا ب4 وتصدقت ب4 كان خيرا لك. That he saw Qurrat Abu Nuh, he saw Shubah saw him wearing a new piece of clothing, a garment, a shirt. So he asked him for how much he had purchased that piece of clothing and garment. So he told him for 8 dirahim, which was a large sum of money at that time. So he said, woe to you, do you not fear Allah Azza wa Jal? You wear and you purchase and you wear a piece of garment, a clothing that is worth 8 dirahim. Were you not able to purchase the same piece of clothing, that garment, that shirt, for half of that, for 4 dirahim, and give sadaqah with the remaining 4 dirahim? Give sadaqah with the remaining 4 dirahim. So this was the way these great imams lived their lives in the pursuit of this knowledge and safeguarding and preserving the sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They sufficed with the most little of the pleasures of this worldly life and motivated the students upon that. Today we see our youth and people, the same shirt or piece of garment that they can buy for $10, $15, they will be willing to spend hundreds and thousands because it has some logo on it or it has some brand name on it. So the way and methodology of these scholars was that one should suffice himself with that which he needs, and the rest he should spend in the cause of Allah Azza wa Jal. Sulaiman ibn Harb, he says, لو نظرت إلى ثياب شعبة لم تكن تساوي 10 دراهم وكان شيخا كثير الصدقة. That if I was to see the clothes, the garments of my teacher Shubah, then it would not reach 10 dirahim, and he was someone who would give a lot of charity. He would give a lot of charity. He would suffice with that which he needed, and the rest he would give in the path of Allah Azza wa Jal. Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj rahimahullah, he has said, ما شيء أخوف عندي من أن يدخلني النار من الحديث. This is similar to the statement of Sufyan al-Thawri rahimahullah that we mentioned in our previous session, that I do not fear anything that will cause me to enter the hellfire more than the hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We understand this in 2 meanings. One, as we mentioned, to not act upon this hadith. This hadith has reached you. You have learnt it, you have understood it, but you have not acted upon it. This will be a cause for you to enter the hellfire. The second is to make a mistake in this hadith. Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj, from his utmost caution in attributing and narrating about the authority of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he feared that he might have made a mistake in a hadith that would have caused him to enter the hellfire. So this is twofold where we can benefit from. Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah, he said, كان شعبة يجيء إلى الرجل فيقول لا تحدث وإلا استعديت عليك السلطان. That Shubah, and this is widely known upon him, very well known, that he would come to several of the narrators of hadith who were weak in their memory, in their precision, in their reliability. He would come to them and tell them to not narrate hadith on the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to cease from narrating hadith on the authority of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he would tell them, if they do not cease and desist, then I would complain regarding you to the ruler. To the ruler. And this is well known upon Imam Ash-Shubah, and this shows the utmost caution and diligence and the zeal he had to protect and preserve and safeguard the hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam from those people narrating a hadith that are making mistakes in it, that are changing it, that are adding, subtracting in it. And this is one of the reasons that the Sunnah today is preserved, because of these positions and these positions of these great Imams and these methodologies that they implemented in preserving the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And as is well known, one of the most famous sayings is that إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَنْزِعُ بِالسُّلْطَانِ مَا لَا يَنْزِعُ بِالْقُرْآنِ. That verily Allah Azza wa Jal removes and discourages by way of the ruler that which even the Quran might not discourage. That even the Quran might not discourage. And this is well known on the Salaf, that they will say this. Meaning that a person, even though Allah Azza wa Jal has revealed ayat and has warned him from evil deeds and sinning, that is not enough for him to stay away from these sins, as we see today amongst the Muslims. But if they know that there will be a ruler that will take them to account and punish them for the sins, they will stay away from them. That they will stay away from them. So the people in their apparent form, they fear the ruler and his punishment, and they take that to account more than the ayat that Allah Azza wa Jalla has revealed, believing that that is something that will come after in the hereafter. So Shubah, following this methodology, he would warn these narrators to desist and cease from narrating a hadith, not making mistakes in them, otherwise he would complain to the rulers regarding them. Imam Shubah also says, لَا أَنْ أَقَعَ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ إِلَى الْأَرْضِ أَحَبُّ إِلَيَّ مِنْ أَنْ أُدَلِّسِ. That if I were to fall from the heavens, from the skies to the earth, it is more beloved to me than I do tadlis. And we here address the question that the brother asked regarding tadlis. Tadlis, first of all, it is an action where a narrator of hadith narrates a hadith on the authority of his teacher and his sheikh, from whom he has heard other hadith from. This is a teacher, his sheikh, he has attended his gatherings, he has heard a hadith from. But a specific hadith, he has not heard it from him directly. What was the reason? There could be several reasons. He was sick that day. He traveled that day. He was late to the gathering that day. He fell asleep during that gathering. And several other reasons which caused him to not hear that specific hadith from that teacher, even though he is a student and he has heard other hadith. So he utilizes this benefit of the doubt that he is a student and he has heard a hadith from him. So he hears this hadith that he has not heard from it directly from one of the other students, from one of his companions and colleagues. And then he drops his name and narrates it directly on the authority of his sheikh and teacher. So no one would know and no one would doubt him, because he is a student and he has narrated several hadith on this sheikh. So he would narrate these ahadith directly on the authority of that sheikh. He would not mention the student, the colleague he heard this hadith from, but he would narrate it with a sigha, with a wording that is not explicit in showing that he heard it directly from the sheikh. So he would not say haddathana, he would not say akhbarana, he would not say samaytu, which are explicit words that cause a chain of narration to be connected. He would not use these words, he would say an, ana, that an, and he would name his sheikh. This is probable. It could be something that he heard from the sheikh and his teacher. It could be something that he might not have heard. So this is the practice of tadlis that many of the scholars of hadith, they practiced. Many of the scholars of hadith, they practiced. And the scholars of hadith have gathered their names, and even the ahadith they did tadlis in books of the mudallisin that are well known near the scholars of this science, near the students of the science. Imam Shubah, he is an example in tadlis, because tadlis in its foundation, it is a part of deception. It is a part of deception. This is a literal meaning of tadlis, that you deceive somebody, because you're, by way of this narration, you're claiming that you heard it directly from the sheikh. Well, you have not. So Imam Shubah, he is an example of the scholars of hadith who were the farthest away from tadlis, and he has severe statements rebuking tadlis and the scholars who did tadlis, such as these statements that we have recited and we will recite, that if I were to fall from the heavens and the earth, it is more beloved to me than I do tadlis. And we'll mention more statements. So he was the farthest of the people from tadlis. But as the brother mentioned, we have major scholars of hadith who did tadlis. From them, Imam Sufyan al-Thawri, rahimahullah, and before him, Imam Sufyan ibn Uyayna. A very important point to discuss here is that the mudallisin, the narrators of hadith who do tadlis, they are not of the same level. The mudallisin are of 5 levels and categories. Imam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, rahimahullah, he has a book that is called Tabaqat al-Mudallisin. It is well known, the levels and categories of the people who have done tadlis, the narrators of hadith who have done tadlis, and its proper name is Ta'rif Ahl al-Taqdis. This small book, in this book he has divided the narrators who have done tadlis into 5 categories. The first category and the second category are those narrators who have done tadlis, but their tadlis is accepted. Why? The first category are those narrators who do not do tadlis except on thiqat. The link that they have hidden from the chain, those narrators are all thiqat. They are all reliable narrators. And the example of the people, of the scholars who have done this sort of tadlis is Sufyan ibn Uyayna. It is well known upon him that if he were to do tadlis, he were to narrate a hadith on the authority of one of his sheikhs that he didn't hear from directly, he would make sure that the student or the colleague or whoever he heard it from, he is thiqa. So this tadlis does not hurt, because we have known that the link is a reliable narrator. The problem arises because we do not know the link, if he's reliable or not. But if we know that he's reliable, then there's no problem. So Imam Sufyan ibn Uyayna is from this category. The second category are those scholars of hadith, those narrators who have rarely done tadlis. So the scholars of hadith have gathered their chains of narrations, and they have known those links that were hidden. Rarely, who have rarely done tadlis. So the scholars who came after them, they gathered their ahadith and chains of narration, and then they found out who were those links that were hidden. From the examples of this, as Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar mentions, is Sufyan al-Thawri. He is from those scholars, narrators who has rarely done tadlis, and the scholars have gathered his ahadith and his chains of narrations, and they have pinpointed who are those narrators who he has heard a hadith from and hidden them. Understood? So this is the reason why the tadlis of Sufyan ibn Uyayna and the tadlis of Sufyan al-Thawri is accepted. Is accepted. If they say an, this is to be accepted and not to be rejected. As the scholars of hadith are upon this methodology to accept the tadlis of these imams. Returning back to Imam Shubah, as we mentioned, he is an example of those imams who were the farthest away from tadlis and rebuked it severely. From the statements is that لَأَنْ أَخْكِرَ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ أو من فوق هذا القصر أحب إلي من أن أقول قال الحكم لا لشيء لم أسمعه منه. That if I were to fall from the heavens to the earth, or he pointed to one of the castles of that times, if I were to fall from top of this castle onto the earth, it is more beloved to me than I say in a hadith that قال الحكم, that I heard Hakam, one of his shuyukh, one of his teachers, narrating a hadith that I did not directly hear from him. That I did not directly hear from him. Meaning that I do tadlis on Hakam. It is better for me to fall from the heavens to the earth than I do tadlis in a hadith of Hakam by saying قال Hakam or an Hakam in a hadith that I did not directly hear from him. Imam Sufyan al-Thawri rahimahullah, he says ما رأيت أحدا أورع في الحديث من شعبة يشك في الحديث الجيد فيتركه. That I have not seen anyone be more cautious in the hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam than Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj. If he were to doubt in a small matter of that hadith, he would leave it. If he were to doubt in a small matter of a jayyid, a good authentic hadith, he would leave it. This was the utmost precision and utmost diligence and caution these great scholars had in the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that even authentic hadith, if they were to have a doubt regarding a small matter in that hadith, a small word, they would not narrate this hadith and reject it and leave it. They will reject it and leave it. These are the great efforts and these methodologies and actions that allowed for the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to be preserved in these great times of tribulations, when the people of innovation were widespread and attributing lies and mistakes and errors to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. These are the scholars who preserved the Sunnah for us, and this is why the Sunnah has reached us in a preserved state. Walhamdulillah. Imam Shubah himself, he says, لو حابيت أحدا حابيت هشاما ابن حسان وكان قريبه. That if I were to do mujamala or suck up to anyone or be lenient with him, then I would be lenient with Hisham ibn Hassan or Hisham ibn Hassan, because he was his close relative. He was his close relative. He says that سئل شعبة عن هشام بن حسان فقال خل وزيت. Imam Shubah was asked regarding the ahadith that Hisham ibn Hassan narrates. So he said khallun wa zayd, something that is measly, that is of no value. The hadith that Hisham ibn Hassan, who's a weak narrator, he has narrated, they are of no value. So this shows that these great scholars of hadith, they did not give special treatment and preferences to their family members or people they loved and they liked. Rather, they had sincerity in this field, and they defended the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as it should be defended, without fearing anybody, without giving preference and being lenient with anybody, even if they were the closest of relatives to them. Even if they were the closest of relatives to them. Hammad ibn Zayd rahimahullah, he says, جاءني أبان ابن أبي عياش فقال أحب أن تكلم شعبة أن يكف عني فكلمته فكف عنه أياما. Hammad ibn Zayd, from the great scholars whose biography we'll study inshallah, he says that one of the narrators named Aban ibn Abi Ayyash, who is also a weak, extremely weak narrator, Aban ibn Abi Ayyash, he says he came to me to ask my intercession to Shubah, saying that I request from you that you speak to Shubah so that he does not speak upon me, so that he does not criticize me. So Hammad ibn Zayd talked to Shubah, requested this from him, so he stopped speaking to him for a few days. He stopped speaking about him, about this narrator, Imam Ibn Abi Hatim, criticizing him for a few days, out of respect, for the position of Imam Hammad ibn Zayd. وَأَتَانِي فِي اللَّيْلِ فَقَالَ إِنَّهُ لَا يَحِلُّ الْكَفُّ عَنْ أَبَانٍ فَإِنَّهُ يَكْذِبُ عَلَى رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ. After discontinuing criticizing this narrator of hadith, he came to Imam Hammad ibn Zayd after a few days upon pondering over his matter and his affair of this narrator, and he said, verily it is not permissible for me to stay quiet about him. It is not permissible for me to remain silent about him, for verily he lies upon the authority of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they deemed this their duty and religion, to preserve the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They did not fear in this path anybody, and they did not make concessions and have leniency for anybody. Hammad al-Warraq al-Bajali, he says, Kunna bibab Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj. And this is a great story that shows the utmost effort these great Muhaddithin, scholars of Hadith, and these Imams of the Salaf exerted in determining the authenticity of a single hadith, not the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not several hadith, a single hadith. The great efforts and the great sacrifices they made to reach this pinnacle in this knowledge. How can a scholar rule upon a hadith to be authentic and unauthentic? It is by way of these efforts. We will see now how these scholars found the hidden defects in these ahadith, and how they caught the mistakes and errors of the weak narrators, and how they caught the lies of the fabricators. It is not an easy affair. It is not an easy affair. It took a great deal of effort to catch these errors and mistakes, to catch these lies. We will mention a great story here that shows a great example from this great Imam Shubah of catching a mistake and an error in a single hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Hammad al-Warraq al-Bajali, he says that we were on the doorstep of Imam Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj, and we had a group of our companions along with us from the students of hadith who were reviewing and revising the hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وَمَعِي جَمَاعَةٌ نَتَذَاكَرُ السُنَّةِ فَقُلْتُ حدثنا إسرائيل أبي إسحاق عن عبد الله بن عطاء عن عقبة بن عامر عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال من توضأ فأحسن الوضوء دخل من أي أبواب الجنة شاء. That I narrated a hadith in which Israel, he narrated to me on his grandfather Abu Ishaq al-Sabi'i and Abdullah ibn Ata and Uqba ibn Amir radiallahu anhu, that he said, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, whoever makes wudu and perfects his wudu, then he will enter paradise from any of the doors of paradise, from whatever doors he wishes. فخرج شعبة وأنا أحدث بهذا الحديث فصفعني ثم قال يا مجنون سمعت أبا إسحاق يحدث عن عبد الله بن عطاء عقبة بن عامر. So Shubah Ibn al-Hajjaj, he exited upon hearing this hadith that I was narrating to my colleagues on the doorstep of Shubah. He came and he struck me on my chest, and he told me, oh Majnoon, oh foolish person, are you narrating a hadith on Abu Ishaq al-Sabi'i, on Abdullah ibn Ata and Uqba ibn Amir? Is this the chain of narration that you're narrating this hadith by? فَقُلْتُ يَا أَبَا إِسْحَاقَ سَمِعْتَ عَبْدُ اللَّهِ ibn Ata يُحَدِّث عن Uqba ibn Amir, that, oh Shubah, have you heard Abdullah ibn Ata narrate any hadith on Uqba ibn Amir? قلت Abdullah ibn Ata سمع Uqba ibn Amir فقال اسكت. He asked him, have you heard any hadith that Abdullah ibn Ata has narrated on the Sahabi Uqba ibn Amir? So he told him to remain quiet. فقلت لا أسكت. فالتفت إلي مسعر ابن كدام فقال يا شعبة عبد الله بن عطاء حي بمكة فخرجت إلى مكة فلقيت عبد الله بن عطاء. So they differed in this matter. If Abdullah ibn Ata heard any ahadith from Uqba ibn Amir, from this Sahabi, this Tabi, Abdullah ibn Ata, if he heard any hadith from Uqba ibn Amir, they differed. So the great scholar of hadith, Mis'ar ibn Kidam, who was in that gathering, he's told Shubah, "Oh Shubah, why are we quarreling and disagreeing? Abdullah ibn Atta is alive in Mecca." In Mecca. And where was this? In Basra, in Iraq. So Shubah said, "I'll travel to Mecca to meet Abdullah ibn Atta," just for this single hadith. فَلَقِيتُ عَبْدُ اللَّهِ بْنُ عَطَى فَقُلْتُ حَدِيثَ الْوُضُوءِ. The only reason I traveled to him is to ask regarding this hadith, hadith al-wudu, this hadith. فَقَالَ عُقْبَةُ ibn Amir, that I narrated on Uqba ibn Amir. فَقُلْتُ يَرْحَمَكَ اللَّهِ سَمِعْتَ مِنْهُ, may Allah have mercy on you, Abdullah ibn Atta, but did you hear this from him directly? قَالَ لَا, no, I did not hear from him directly. The apparent chain for a weak student of hadith like us, Abdullah ibn Atta and Uqba ibn Amir, two thiqat, trustworthy narrators, will rule this hadith to be authentic. How did the scholars find the hidden defects and errors? By way of this great efforts. This is just the starting of the story. So he asked him, did you hear from traveling, after traveling from Basra to Makkah, did you hear this from Uqba ibn Amir? He said, no. Haddathani Sa'd ibn Ibrahim. I heard it from a person named Sa'd ibn Ibrahim. فَأَتَيْتُ مَالِكِ ibn Anas وَهُوَ خَارِجٌ فَسَأَلْتُ عَنْ سَعْدِ ibn Ibrahim فَقَالَ لِي مَا حَجَّ الْعَامِ فَلَمَّا قَضَيْتُ نُسُكِي مَضَيْتُ إِلَى الْمَدِينَةِ فَلَقِيتُ سَعْدِ ibn Ibrahim. This was in Mecca, and Imam Malik had come to Mecca to make Hajj in that year. This was during the times of Hajj. So he met Imam Malik in Mecca to ask him about Sa'd ibn Ibrahim, who was a narrator who lived in Medina. So he asked him regarding Sa'd ibn Ibrahim. So Imam Malik said he did not make Hajj this year. He's still in Medina. He has not made Hajj. فَقَالَ فَلَمَّا قَدَيْتُ نُسُكِي مَضَيْتُ إِلَى الْمَدِينَةِ فَلَقِيتُ سَعْدَ ibn Ibrahim. So after making Hajj, I traveled to Medina to meet this narrator, Sa'd ibn Ibrahim, from Basra to Mecca. Then from Mecca to Medina to meet Sa'd ibn Ibrahim. فَقُلْتُ حَدِيثَ الْوُضُوءِ. The only reason I have come is for the single hadith, the hadith of wudu. فَقَالَ مِنْ عِنْدَكُمْ خَرَجْ. That this hadith also I have not heard from Uqba ibn Amir. Rather, it has come from Iraq, from your area. After he has traveled from Basra to Makkah, Medina, he found out the hadith, the foundation of this hadith lies in Iraq. مِنْ عِنْدَكُمْ خَرَجْ حَدَّثَنِي زِيَادِ ibn Mihraq. So now, Abdullah ibn Atta on Uqba ibn Amir, we found out now it is not Abdullah ibn Atta and Uqba ibn Amir, there are two narrators between them. Two narrators. There are two narrators. Sa'd ibn Ibrahim and Ziyad ibn Mihraq. Ziyad ibn Mihraq. And Ziyad ibn Mihraq is a narrator from Basra. He lives in Basra. All this travels and now he has to return back to Basra. فرجعت إلى البصرة فلقيت زياد بن محراق وأنا شاحب اللون وشح الثياب كثير الشعر فقال من أين حدثت الحديث؟ قال ليس هو من حاجتك. قلت فما بد؟ قال لا حتى تذهب تدخل الحمام وتغسل ثيابك. So he said, I returned back to Basra, from Basra to Mecca to Medina. I returned back to Basra and my skin color had changed. And my clothes have become extremely dirty. And my hair have become unkept. And I started asking Ziyad ibn Mihraq regarding this hadith. So he said, no, I will not answer you until you go and clean yourself. Until you take a bath, until you clean yourself. ثُمَّ تَجِي فَأُحَدِّثُكَ بِهِ. So then you come to me, then I will narrate it to you. قَالَ فَدَخَلْتُ الْحَمَّامِ وغسلت ثيابي ثم أتيته فقال حدثني شهر بن حوشب عن أبي ريحانة. After he took a bath, he came to him, so he told him that verily I've heard it from Shahr ibn Hawshab, who heard it from Abi Rihana. So he turned from Abdullah ibn Atta to Uqba to Abdullah ibn Atta on Sa'd ibn Ibrahim, on Ziyad ibn Mihraq, on Shahr ibn Hawshab, on Abi Rihana, on Uqba ibn Amir. Four narrators in between. Four narrators in between. When Shubah heard this, فَقُلْتُ هَذَا حَدِيثٌ سَعَدَ ثُمَّ نَزَلْ دَمِّرُوا عَلَيْهِ لَيْسَ لَهُ أَصَلٌ. He said, verily, this hadith that we thought was Ali, that we thought was a short chain of narration, that Abdullah ibn Atta narrates on Uqba, we found out that it is nazil. Between them are 4 narrators, 4 weak narrators strike this hadith. It is not authentically established on the authority of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is just a single hadith, the efforts and the travels and the sacrifice they made to find these errors and mistakes and to uncover these defects. This is not an easy task, and this is how the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was preserved, and we can be assured today that it is exactly with us as it was during his lifetime. After this, we will finish with the last point in the life of this great Imam, which is his death, rahimahullah. He passed away in the year 160 after the Hijrah, 160 after the Hijrah, in the city of Basra in Iraq, and he reached the age of 77 years. Imam Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak, rahimahullah, he says, "Kuntu inda Sufyan, إذ جاءه موت شعبة فقال مات الحديث." That I was with Sufyan al-Thawri in Kufa when the news of the death of Shubah reached us from Basra. So Sufyan al-Thawri, he said this great statement, مات الحديث, that the hadith of Prophet ﷺ today has died. The one who was defending it and catching the mistakes and errors and exposing the errors of the weak and the fabricators, he has passed away today. That shield, that safeguarding has died today. Sa'd ibn Shubah, the sons of Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj, rahimahullah, he says, أوصى أبي إذا مات أن أغسل كتبه فغسلتها. That my father, he advised me and wrote a will to me that if I were to die, then wash my books, wash my scrolls and books in which I had compiled the hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So I washed them. And erased whatever was written on them. And this is something well known from the scholars of hadith. And many of the scholars of hadith left this will that if they were to die, then their books in which they had compiled the sunnah and the hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it should either be washed, or it should either be burnt, or it should either be buried. And many of the scholars of hadith, they did this. And many of you might ask the question as to the reason for this. This was also a proof of their utmost diligence and caution regarding the hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that even after their death, they cared and worried about this fact, that those books, if they were to left around, then people who are not trustworthy, who are enemies of Islam, enemies of the Sunnah, the people of innovation and misguidance, they might come and change and alter their books, add to it, subtract to it, and alter their books. It could fall into the hands of those people who are not trustworthy. So the way to safeguard the Sunnah was to burn or to wash away or to bury these books, because these students left behind them their students who carried on this legacy and who precisely memorized and safeguarded the hadith. That which is in the heart cannot be altered, cannot be added to, subtracted to. Just like they undertook this great efforts to preserve and precisely memorize the hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, their students followed their path. They heard this hadith from them, memorized it, preserved it, and safeguarded. So that which is in the hearts, it cannot be altered or changed. But that which is written in books, it could be. So many of the scholars of the Salaf and the scholars of Hadith, they advised with this will that after their death, their books should be burnt or buried or washed away. This is why many of the books of the scholars of Hadith and the scholars of the Salaf, we do not have in our possession today. We find in the biographies of these scholars that Imam Shubah, for example, has authored a book in this fields from the science of Hadith. But those books are not in our presence because they themselves have ordered for those books to be buried and washed away and burned. But they conveyed their knowledge to their students who carried on this knowledge until it came to be preserved in other books of Hadith that we have in our possession. And with this we have finished the biography of this great Imam Abu Bistam, Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj, the Imam of the area of Basra in the time of the Atba' Tabi'een. If there are any questions, then we can take them.
So, two questions. First one is, can you mention the other three categories of the Mudallisin?
We mentioned only the first two categories because their ahadith are accepted, even along with their tadlis. Because the first of them, they only do tadlis on the thiqat, and the second of them, they're extremely rare, and the scholars of hadith have fell upon and found those links. The third, fourth, and fifth categories are the categories regarding whose ahadith are to be rejected, unless there is tasrih bis-sama', unless those narrators come with a wording that shows undeniable hearing and connection between them and their shaykh. They say akhbarana, haddathana, sami'tu. If it is a probable word like an, anna, qala, then it is to be rejected until a word comes between them and the shaykh that shows without doubt that there is no chance of it being broken. Sami'tu, haddathana, akhbarana. So these are the three remaining categories, and their details. The third category are those who indulge in this tadlis and whose hadith is not to be accepted except they mention a word that shows direct connection. The fourth category is that those who along with this they have some sort of innovation with them. The fifth category are those who along with that they are extremely weak in their memorization. But the concluding what it revolves around is that from the third to the fifth category, their hadith is not to be accepted unless they do a tasrih bis-sama'. They mention a word that shows without a doubt connectivity between them and the shaykh that they heard this hadith directly from him.
Also, Sheikh, so can we say that if there is a mudallis in the chain and even if he narrates with an, but if Imam Shubah has accepted that hadith, then
I mean, this is, as we said, I mean, this is a detailed topic, and this requires us to go into detail into other matters. But Imam Shubah, due to his extreme fartherness from tadlis and severely rebuking it, as we mentioned some of the statements, the scholars use him as a criteria to accept a hadith of some of the mudallisin. If Imam Shubah narrates on those narrators, they will accept it, if it is by his chain. Because Imam Shubah will not accept a hadith from them except it is bit tasrih bis-sama', yani he has heard it for sure directly from his shaykh, such as Qatada ibn Diyama as-Sadusi. Qatada is also from the mudallisin, rahimahullah. But if Shubah narrates on Qatada, this hadith, the scholars of hadith accepted. And Imam Shubah has a statement in this that kafaytukum tadlisa thalath, yani I have sufficed for you tadlis of some of the narrators of hadith, from them Qatada and Abu Ishaq as-Sabi'i, other than them. They are mudallisin, but if Shubah narrates, it's a hadith that Shubah narrates on them, then their hadith, even with an, is to be accepted.
So from all of this, correct me if I'm wrong, what we understand is that at the time of the Salaf, there seemed to be nothing more important or nothing of value except, the seeking of hadith and the gatherings of hadith and any fiqh. If there was fiqh talked about, it was connected to hadith, and if any type of seeking of knowledge happened, it was around the seeking of hadith of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sunnah of Allah. And so if, and these people were, Ahle-Hadith, whether they're normal people amongst them or the scholars. So if that is the case, that amongst the Salaf, this was really the only thing happening. Does that show, and of course, and it shows that the way of Ahl-Hadith is the Salafi way. Is that a correct statement to say? I mean, of course, I would imagine.
I mean to say that the only thing that was taught is hadith and science is not a correct statement. The scholars of Islam, the great scholars of the Salaf, they were imams in all their fields. As we have mentioned several statements of Imam Malik, of Imam Sufyan ibn Uyayna, today with Sufyan al-Thawri and Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj, they were knowledgeable in all the sciences of Islam. From tafsir, we mentioned Imam Sufyan ibn Uyayna was from the greatest mufassirun of this ummah. He is from the greatest scholars of tafsir of this ummah. Imam Sufyan al-Thawri, today we mentioned, he's from the greatest fuqaha of this ummah. He is from the greatest zuhad and the people who feared Allah Azza wa Jal from this ummah. So there are scholars, these scholars, they gathered the other sciences such as tafsir and fiqh and other than them. But regarding fiqh and jurisprudence, during these same times, the times of the Atba'u Tabi'een, during this same era, two schools of thought arose. So to say that the only way was to give precedence to hadith and to derive rulings from the hadith of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and to refer back to it, then that is not correct. There was the school of thought of Ahlul Rai that we have addressed in some of the statements that we mentioned in a previous class and today. There were two opposing schools of thought and conflicting schools of thought, and the Imam of the school of thought of the Ahlul Rai was Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, and his students who had a different way of deducing rulings and deriving rulings in the ahkam of Islam. And the Ahlul Hadith, from the Imams, so all of these Imams that we have mentioned, Imam Malik, Sufyan ibn Uyayna, Sufyan al-Thawri, Imam Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Ahmad, and other Imams. So there were two schools of thought. They had different methodologies in deriving the rulings regarding the acts of worship in Islam. But the way of the Ahlul Hadith is to give precedence to the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, to follow it unconditionally, to derive rulings from it unconditionally, and then the statements of the scholars who agree with it, then we are with it, and the statements that do not agree, then they are rewarded for the ijtihad and their mistake is forgiven.
One more. Between the first two Imams, Sufyan ibn Uyayna and Malik ibn Anas, and now Shubah ibn
al-Hajjaj,
and now Shubah ibn Hajjaj, is it correct to say that Shubah, he stands out from the others, or perhaps from the first two, from the perspective of him being critical regarding the narrators?
Yeah.
And is that his maybe?
As we just mentioned, the scholars have mentioned this, that rather they have even attributed that he is the first person to critique narrators of hadith. But as we mentioned, this is not in its apparent state. This means that he was the one who expanded this science, and he established the principles of the science, and he made it reach its pinnacle and utmost level. And he is the one who has spoken more about the narrative hadith than anyone before him. So this is without a doubt something that differentiates him from the three other Imams that we covered, but that does not mean that they were less in their precision or less in their memory than Imam Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj. As we mentioned, Imam Malik, he did not accept hadith and did not narrate except on thiqat, except on reliable narrators. So without a doubt, this science of critiquing and praising and disparaging narrators, Imam Shubah ibn al-Hajjaj is called the Imam al-Jarh wat-Tadeel, who expanded this science, laid its foundations, created its principles, and spoke about the narrators more than anyone before him.
Sheikh, can you make tawjih for me to harmonize? I'm having a hard time understanding from the bab of Tawadi from the Sheikh, seems like, versus the ayah in the Quran that talks about kitman al-ilm.
Yeah.
Because to me, from what I'm looking at, listening to it, it's like, I understand the Sheikh is trying to scrutinize, to erase all that hard work. Wouldn't that be kitman al-ilm?
No. I mean, this has to be, as we mentioned, this has to be taken and understood in its proper context. A part of knowledge or a piece of information, it can be a trial and tribulation for someone in a specific time, in a specific period, and it might not be for another person in another time and another period. So these statements or these actions or the rulings of not hiding knowledge or of having tawadu and having humbleness, I mean, these are not in their absolute form. You might take the position of humbleness with somebody who has that knowledge with him, and you might take the position of not conveying the knowledge to a person who might cause that knowledge will cause him a trial and tribulation. So these books, as I mentioned, the scholars, they only undertook this act for the safeguarding and the preservation of the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, after ensuring that they had conveyed and they are ensured that their students have precisely and memorized it and safeguarded this ahadith. They do not take this action except after safely ensuring that their students, this sunnah has been conveyed to them, they have learnt it, they have memorized it, they have revised it, they have preserved it and safeguarded.
So Shafi'iyya is more stronger than Kitab?
I mean, the scholars of the Salaf, for them the foundation was memorization. Dabt as-Sadr was the foundation before Dabt al-Kitab. Hayyakum. Any other questions? If there are no questions, then we'll end our session here until we meet, inshallah, next Saturday and continue with the Imams that Imam Ibn Abi Hatim al-Razi has mentioned in this great book, Taqdimatul-Marifah bi Kitab al-Jarh wat-Tadeel. Wallahu ta'ala alam wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama tasliman kathira.
وذكر فإن الذكرى تنفع المؤمنين وما خلقت الجن والإنس إلا ليعبدون